Good afternoon, everyone. You know that horrible moment when Saskia says, I've got you a speaking slot, and you think, I'm on after lunch, challenging. And then that dawning moment when you go, I'm on after Gil. Oh no. And having worked with him and our association has worked with him, I'm aware of that challenge, so I'll attempt to keep some pace, but in the process, and give you some thoughts. But advocacy. What, why, how? It's not necessarily a process that you're in sport participation, you're in facilities, you're in developmental work, that advocacy, lobbying, these kind of skill sets are not your core work area. So what I try and do is give a little thought about how we go at this process, because we are an advocacy organisation. We are doing something, and I can, like everybody, I can steal everything from Wikipedia. So I take the definition, politics, and processes that get stuff spent, get decisions made. If things get spent, decisions get made, frankly, to the participation and the stadium builders and the connected people, you've got the space to deliver. But there are times when you have to go and ask for stuff. And that's what really this session is a bit about. And that's what is about us. Because we are the lobby voice of the cyclist movement. Not the pure sport end, but the tourism, leisure, transportation component. And hence, we're in this urban session, because we are urban lobbyists. That's our DNA. That's where we came from national cycling associations and cyclist unions that wanted to lobby for cycling. So we can take that definition and say, yeah, that's us. But from one of my friends, when I kind of told him what I did, he was a little bit confused and then said, so you're a lobbyist? Yeah, I don't get it. Everybody hates lobbyists. I never heard there were any good lobbyists. So it does not compute that there are people who lobby for good stuff. They lobby for tobacco and alcohol and cars, and they corrupt politicians. That's what lobbyists do. And I sometimes say, actually, no, I think there's space in lives for people who lobby on the other side to try and do some of these human rights and civil things that we really care about. And that is us. I'm going to do a why, and frankly, I've got about 3 photos, and my predecessor had about 600, so if you were paying attention this morning in this session, you've kind of seen this, but I'll try and do it in 2 slides. Why we lobby? Why we lobby? We lobby because there's been a transformation in society. In terms of physical activity, there's barely a city in Europe where you couldn't have taken this photograph. Anywhere. Back, say, the 50s. There are a hell of a lot of cities in Europe where you could take this photograph. And the many more that Gil showed, or others have showed. Why do we lobby? Well, frankly, we and our community and the people in this room and the society we work with, we're very good at building our alliances. We can work with our academic colleagues, we can build the evidence, we have great grassroots movements. But in what we do, and in terms of that space belongs to someone else. The decision-making process belongs to someone else. The transformational money belongs to someone else. And we actually believe that it is our job to turn a small lever to get very, very big change. And so we also know that those outcomes that we want are possible when that public lever is turned. And so we can paint pictures of spaces of change, which are cultural, but also movement space. And that's our process for other people to walk into. We do almost no participation work. In our organisation, our members do, and we do partnerships, but we're the core of the decision change. And as a result of that, I mean, our outcome that we state in all of our work is we would like to double cycling in Europe. In true terms, and that's really daily cycling, that's 70 million people in the EU whose behaviour would need to change. We do not change 70 million people's behaviour with a small team in Brussels. What we aim to do is go through the policy process, And in real numbers, we think from governments that have done it that you can make transformational change with about 10% of the budget. 10%? If you've ever tried to squeeze 1% extra budget out of a public body, you know how hard that is. But we can measure how much it will cost. And some governments have done it, and we'd like to parallel that outside mobility in recreation and tourism. That's what we are. We're lobbyists. That's our goal. But I was asked to bring to this is a little bit of how. Well, how, frankly, is just what I said. From dropping a pebble in a pond, can I create a 70 million person change? No. And that's, how can you get inside and get governments to spend millions or others? And what I believe, fundamentally, is that this is just like any other piece of work you do when you train your coaches or you hire qualified accountants. You study political change and you learn the lessons about the levers you can pull. And you study it carefully and you think about the process. And frankly, we do go and study big car or tobacco or oil or Greenpeace or other movements and discover political science, political change. It's key to what we do. And as part of the community, that's what we kind of offer back, and we work with ISCA and others to try and bring some of these tools to the table. And we also study what's worked. Frankly, what would work would be to clone politicians like Gil Penalosa. Don't have that option. You know, if you get the right politician at the right time, it all seems very easy. But other changes, we study. How is it there was transformational behaviour of Dutch mums in the 1970s? Oh, she had a Dutch mum. Dutch mum went out and protested on the street and said, stop killing the kids. How did that transform into traffic jams and places needed? The biggest space pressure is where do you park your bike? And we're looking at that sense of protest, but actually underlying societal need to stop children being sick or dying or having accidents that hit a political chord. And we know in the Netherlands that happened. Many of the same protests happened around other parts of Europe, and nothing happened. So what was the transformation that made the Netherlands different? And referring to the kind of placemaking movement, how is it that it's quite normal to take your city's most wonderful architectural feature, like this Italian city, this Duomo, and use that public space as a kind of dead spot? And people like Penalosa and Gale and others have been in this placemaking movement and started to transform urban spaces. And interestingly, we discovered this was a cultural and even a kind of heritage movement and an architectural thought space. What it's turned into is possibly the most powerful economic force in cities that are a generation, in a generation. Because cities that do this make money. They are healthy and vibrant cities, and we get all the knock-on benefits of movement and space and culture. And I'll do one non-urban one, which is fascinating. When mountain biking arrived in Europe from the US, it was basically either seen as something dodgy and hippie, or frankly, you will scare the animals, you will trample the undergrowth, you will scare the walkers, and you'll probably break things, and probably half of them are on drugs, and if you look at this guy, you never know quite what he's on. But frankly, would you want one of these in your garden? And it was the most disruptive technology in our sector in a generation. What changed that, from that perception of who these nutters were, into one of the biggest rural economic forces in tourism that was newly discovered in the last 20, 30 years, was a business case that these people turned up and spent money. And cities that were fighting to drive them away suddenly turned around and said, can we build a bike park? This is Canada, but in the UK, the Forestry Commission, here that owns much of the public forests, was under huge pressure to kick them out. And then they did the economic survey years ago in a remote forest in North Wales, and frankly discovered the bird watchers weren't paying much, and the Walkers are paying a little bit, these guys would travel half a country for the best trades. And it was transformational, but this transformation was economic. 3 different transformations in terms of real challenges at the start around lobbying and advocacy that did different things. And when we study transformational change and we study political science, we find that these real transformations, the big ones, have 3 things in common. But interestingly, many of the things we lobby for never happen. And a lot of study of political change suggests that if you don't have at least 2 of these 3, don't bother. Wait for another 6 months, wait for a year, wait for conditions to be right. Number 1 is there has actually got to be a problem that somebody needs to fix, preferably with public interest behind it. We can sit in this room and talk about the public health crisis of inactivity, and actually right now, the best thing that's working for cycling in cities is air quality. In terms of risk to society, it's about 1/20th of the risk of inactivity. But it's politically hot, and the mayors and others feel they have to do something about it. So there's a factor that someone's got to fix a problem. Someone's got to fix economic development in rural areas. Someone's got to do things. Some statistics work. The second thing is, it has actually got to work. Someone somewhere's got to know how to do it. It's one of the great challenges with climate change. That at a kind of city level is not the belief that my solution makes a difference because I'm not fixing China. It's always been one of the problems. But in reverse, at just the right time, someone has got a costed, practical, realistic solution. Even a simple thing like a budget line. You want money out of the council and have just made the budget decision for the next 2 years, you are going to wait 2 years. Because it is actually not possible to make that change at this point in time. So, but there has to be a solution that someone can adopt. And the third factor is frankly that it needs political capital. Endorsement, support, or equally you have political cover. So if someone doesn't like it, there are people in the influencing community who care. At least 2 out of 3 must be in place for disruptive change at a level that you can see and feel and touch. A single street regeneration can be on a small scale. Are all these 3 factors in place? What's interesting when you study this is that the guy called King did a lot of work and actually said, frankly, these things go up and down all the time. Public opinion, media opinion, the crisis jumps from economic to refugees to education to closing the schools to there's a big local campaign in the newspaper about a child accident, but whatever it is, it moves. Solutions are not always the right solution. The piece of land you wanted is no longer available, and you've got to have a new plan and a new plan. And obviously political capital varies. And what Kingdom argues, and we find from our own work, is basically there is a point in time when 2 or 3 of these things line up. Your job as advocates is twofold. One is you can try and create the conditions when they line up. Yeah, you can work the media, you can create a storm, you can build your political capital. You must always have the policy documents ready for that moment in time, but you can actually leverage that because you have your influencing. Or frankly, you should just wait and be ready. Because if it's not right this time, when is it going to be right? And that moment when someone looks around and says, as they did in the UK with me nearly 20 years ago, they said, ministers are under pressure to do something about child accidents. They're going to recommend compulsory bicycle helmets, and they're going to recommend high-vis vests, and they're going to do this kind of stuff. And if you haven't got a solution, the minister's going to have to make an announcement in the next 2 or 3 months because he's under pressure. I can tell you now the result is that £10 million a year is spent on child safety education on bicycles in the UK every year, and it's a budget that's almost uncuttable because it's seen to be in defence of children's safety. And whenever a future minister comes under pressure and says, what are you doing about children's safety, minister? He's always got, yeah, well, we train 500,000 kids a year. So, you know, we're looking after the children, and he's not under any political pressure. But had we not had that costed, practical, ready solution around in that period, we were at a severe risk of some very negative political decisions being made around our world, which would have killed a whole layer of activity. So we argue that in our advocacy work, and you can then spend another 20 lectures and you come and work for us to argue what are the different tools you create. I mean, we use economics because we work on the level of an economic institution called the European Union. So if you don't do economics, but frankly after 2008 and after the Great Crisis, it's told us, frankly, if you don't bring jobs, don't turn up. Because nobody's listening. We don't care that cycling saves billions in healthcare, tell us the job's number. So what do? We hire a university, we get a job study done, and we go in with jobs. Or we go with CO2. Or now we will go with air quality, but we will be ready for when the political shift comes with our practical argument for that political shift. And that's the next level of detail you go down to. And as you saw in those case studies, now we interestingly tell, when the Dutch mums complained, what was ready in the background was probably the most highly educated town planning and civil engineering community in Europe. They were in place when this movement started. That does not exist in other countries like Britain. It didn't exist in many other countries where anybody could actually do the engineering. When the placemaking world did its work, it was ready because other people came with the economics and the package was kind of ready and in place. So different cities can now buy into the placemaking movement. And say mountain biking wasn't ready. It was about to be kicked out. And in countries like the US, they had huge problems with access. And then they built in the economics because that was what was needed to go with that package to make that deliver. My conclusion, basically, I would jokingly say, lobbying is my sport. I've been successfully bad at so many sports I've lost count. And this is a place where the term in English they call them policy wonks, slightly geeky guys who do research papers. This is as good as it gets for us. This is our sport. But like any sport, we train, we learn, we practice, we coach other people, which is what we do a lot. We have a project called Active Voice where we're doing some coaching, and we're trying to build up that portfolio. And people come to us for help, because that's what you do when that's your way of working. And we will celebrate success. We will celebrate Dutch cycling and Danish progress and mountain biking and all the things that go with it. But ultimately, in our world, the most single things we plan to succeed, we plan for the moment that the window, the policy window opens, and we are ready, 1, 2, 3, with the 3 key components. And sometimes we just wait. And sometimes we're in place. But ultimately, that only works if you are ready on that brief moment, sometimes when the thing opens up. And that's the difference, we think, between successful advocacy and lobbying, is that you have done all the work and coaching that you would have done if it were a sport in preparation for your policy moment.